Resuming debate, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
I rise today to speak about the 2016 budget. The document was created after listening to tens of thousands of Canadians and hearing from them about what they wanted to see from their government. It reflects the priorities of Canadians, and it embodies the real change that the people of Parkdale High Park voted for on October 19th of last year. Today, I want to organize my thoughts around three central themes, Mr. Speaker, that infuse the core of this document. First, our government's commitment to a fairer and more inclusive society. Second, our objective of helping Canadian children thrive. And thirdly, the goal of creating a long-term vision for Canada. On the first theme, Mr. Speaker, I came to this country as a Ugandan refugee in 1972. I was 10 months old at the time. My father, my mother, my 4-year-old sister and I arrived with nothing more than a couple of suitcases. But we lived in a society where my sister and I, the children of working-class parents, had access to the same opportunities as everyone else. We were treated with respect and dignity and showed that no matter where we came from or how limited our means, we lived in a country where our success was limited only by our imagination and our capacity to work hard. For the last 10 years, however, Mr. Speaker, the previous government systematically eroded the foundation of that fair and inclusive society, putting in place barriers to success and limiting rather than empowering people to reach their full potential. I'm proud that our new government is doing things differently. We are committed to restoring a fair and inclusive society. First and foremost, as a part of that commitment, is repairing our relationship with Indigenous peoples. Over the generations, Mr. Speaker, that relationship has suffered from both passive neglect and active hostility. First Nations, the Métis Nation, the Inuit do not enjoy anywhere near the same quality of life as other Canadians. With the 2016 budget, our hope is that this relationship can begin anew. Our government is taking its first steps by launching a national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women. Coupled with this, we are investing $8.4 billion over 5 years to create opportunities and improve the socioeconomic conditions of Indigenous people. Mr. Speaker, correcting this relationship and improving the plight of our First Peoples is not only beneficial for the collective, Mr. Speaker, it is a moral imperative. I know that the residents of my riding know this as well. Organizations in Parkdale High Park have already been taking action. I'm proud of the work that Wigwamen Incorporated has been doing in my riding to rebuild this relationship. Wigwamen is Ontario's oldest and largest urban Indigenous housing provider, with 214 units throughout Toronto, including in Parkdale High Park. Our commitment in this budget, Mr. Speaker, to fostering a fair and more inclusive society extends to protecting many of our most vulnerable. We are working towards lifting seniors out of poverty. Our government is restoring the retirement age back down from 67 to 65 and increasing by nearly $1,000 the GIS supplement that is provided for single low-income seniors. Budget 2016 also targets housing and homelessness, Mr. Speaker. Our social infrastructure investments include $504 million over the next 2 years alone to construct affordable housing units and $573 million to address repair backlogs in social housing. More importantly, Mr. Speaker, this budget dedicates $112 million in the next 2 years alone to homelessness, which also includes much-needed support for things that relate to mental health and addiction. Budget 2016 also strengthens protections for the survivors of domestic violence. Our infrastructure plan will allocate $90 million over 2 years for the construction and renovation of shelters and transition houses for victims of violence. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, my riding is no stranger to this issue. The excellent staff at the Redwood Shelter in Parkdale High Park have been providing a safe and empowering space for women and children fleeing domestic violence for 23 years. Notwithstanding their incredible work in our community, the need for safe spaces for women fleeing domestic violence in Toronto and other cities around Canada persists, and this budget acknowledges that and works towards fulfilling that need. Mr. Speaker, a fairer and inclusive Canada is one that promotes access. Budget 2016 will also make the objective of post-secondary education more attainable by doubling the size of the Canada Student Grant for youth for low and middle-income families. We also know that helping people afford an education alone is not enough. We are committing to helping our youth transition from the classroom to the workforce by investing $495 million in next year alone in the youth employment strategy. The task, again, of preparing our youth to succeed is a community task, Mr. Speaker, and West Neighbourhood House in my riding has been contributing to this task for decades. Through the Toronto Job Youth Corps program, West Neighbourhood House in Parkdale connects youth to the workplace through employment, school, or training for young people between the ages of 16 and 29, kids that are out of school and out of work, helping them to develop important life and employment skills that will help promote future success. This budget's commitment to enhanced funding for youth employment reflects the fact that we value the work being done by entities like West Neighbourhood House. Mr. Speaker, the second thematic point, and I'm keeping an eye on the clock like a good litigation lawyer should, Mr. Speaker. Point number 2 is helping our children thrive. Mr. Speaker, the task of positioning our youth to succeed and contribute to our collective well-being begins much earlier than the post-secondary education that I just referenced. Evidence, Mr. Speaker, shows that children who have a strong start at the beginning of their lives have a greater chance of success later on. Time and again at the doorstep, Mr. Speaker, young families in my community of Parkdale High Park approached me and told me about how difficult it is to raise kids in today's economy. I have 2 young boys of my own, Mr. Speaker. Zakir is age 5, and Nitin will be 2 tomorrow. If you'll permit me a brief indulgence, I'll just like to say, happy birthday, little guy. I'll see you tomorrow. But more importantly, Mr. Speaker, the key is that as a father of a young family, I know that it is rewarding raising a family, but it is very challenging in this economy. Enter Budget 2016. It will give Canadian families more money to help with the high cost of raising their children by replacing the current complicated system of child benefits with a single CCB, the Canada Child Benefit. It's simpler and it's more generous, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, gone are the days of the previous government's universal benefits checks sent to persons with 7-digit salaries who frankly don't need government help in raising their families. Gone also are the days when the previous government would issue you a check only to claw it back as the taxman the following April. This new child tax benefit is tax-free, and it's targeted, Mr. Speaker, so that low and middle-income families will receive more benefits than those with the highest incomes. Mr. Speaker, we campaigned on a very specific promise to deliver assistance to those that need it the most. This targeted child benefit, coupled with the middle-class income tax cut that we passed on January 1st of this year, will do exactly that. Mr. Speaker, the third point. We have a long-term vision for Canada that is encapsulated in this budget. Some of the aspects of that vision have already been articulated from the day that we assumed office. We believe in equality, hence a gender-equal cabinet. We believe in evidence-based policy, hence the restoration of the long-form census. We believe and actually are daring to name the danger of climate change. Hence, we renamed our entire ministry, led at Paris at the COP21 summit, and have invested $3.4 billion in this budget alone for the next 5 years to address climate change. We also believe in compassion. In a subject matter near and dear to my heart, Mr. Speaker, we have responded with accepting 26,000 and counting Syrian refugees into this country. But with this budget, Mr. Speaker, another part of that vision becomes clear. We believe in Canadian culture. The support in this budget for the CBC and organizations that promote Canadian culture illustrate this. The residents of my riding also include a large number of artists, Mr. Speaker, people who are writers, filmmakers, TV producers, musicians, actors, editors. They contribute to the culture of Toronto, and they're a huge economic engine for our country. We believe in cultivating that creative and economic engine, not impeding it, Mr. Speaker. That's why this budget includes an investment of $1.3 billion over 5 years to support arts and cultural organizations, including $550 million alone for the Canada Council for the Arts. But our plan is not simply about promoting creative output for Canada, it's also about preserving our Canadian cultural icons. Time and time again, Mr. Speaker, on the campaign trail and thereafter, the residents of Parkdale High Park told me, after a decade of neglect, save the CBC. We've listened, Mr. Speaker, and we've responded. Budget 2016 commits $675 million to the CBC over the next 5 years as a reaffirmation of the vital voice that CBC and Radio-Canada plays in the public discourse in promoting our languages and supporting our shared culture and values. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, this budget is transformative. After 10 years of neglect, this budget signals to Canadians that they finally have a government that is willing to invest in this country, in its people, in its institutions, in its infrastructure. Most importantly, Mr. Speaker, this budget illustrates our government's commitment to creating a more fair and inclusive society and helping all Canadian children get the best start in life possible. Budget 2016 crafts a long-term vision for this country that reflects our shared values, values like equality, compassion, and commitment to evidence-based policy. I'm proud of this budget, Mr. Speaker, and I will wholeheartedly be supporting it, and I urge all members of this House to do the same. Thank you. Merci.
Questions et commentaires, questions, comments.